15 Hells Angels, soaked, frozen, stranded in the worst ice storm Tennessee had seen in a decade. Most people would have locked the door, called the police, pretended nobody was home. She opened it wide. She had $38 left to her name, a granddaughter sleeping down the hall, a house that was barely standing, and she looked at 15 men covered in skulls and leather, and saw 15 people who needed a hot meal. She fed every single one of them, gave them everything in her kitchen, every last thing. And the man standing at the front of that group, the one with the silver beard and the skull tattoo on his neck, he wasn't just some biker. What showed up at her door the next morning changed her life forever. But before we get to that night, you need to understand something about Beatrice Sullivan. Because what she did didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a woman who had been giving her whole life, even when she had almost nothing left to give. Ridgemont, Tennessee, population just under 2,000. Used to be more. This town once had a furniture factory that employed half the county. Main Street had a hardware store, a barber shop, a bakery, and a diner that served gossip until closing. Then the factory shut down 8 years ago. 300 people walked out with cardboard boxes and no severance. The hardware store followed, then the bakery. Half the storefronts went dark. Ridgemont didn't die all at once. It just got quieter, like a heartbeat winding down. On the edge of town, on a road where the pavement cracked and the streetlights flickered, sat a small house built in 1961, white paint peeling. A porch with a cracked second step everyone knew to skip. That was Beatrice Sullivan's house. She and her husband Earl bought it the year they married, raised 3 children in it. Buried Earl from it 6 years ago. The roof leaked in 3 places. Beatrice set out buckets when it rained. She could do it in the dark. The furnace made a dying sound every morning. Every winter she held her breath, waiting to see if it survived another season. The windows were single pane. In January, frost formed on the inside. She lived on Social Security, $1,280 a month. Subtract mortgage, electric, water, gas, Zoe's school supplies, groceries, and her blood pressure medication. What was left could fit in an envelope. Most months it did. She clipped coupons, bought day-old bread, grew tomatoes, collards, and herbs in a small garden out back. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. But here's the thing about Beatrice Sullivan. Her kitchen was spotless. Everything else could be falling apart, but that kitchen was her kingdom. Cast iron skillets seasoned by 40 years of use, a spice rack refilled from bulk bins, cumin, paprika, cayenne, cinnamon, and on the counter always her mother's recipe book, handwritten, pages yellow and grease-stained, held together with tape and a rubber band. Beef stew, buttermilk biscuits, sweet potato pie, brown sugar cornbread. Every recipe memorized, but she still opened the book every time, like a ritual. Like a prayer. She didn't cook just for herself and Zoe, she cooked for everyone. Monday, chicken and dumplings left on old Mr. Henderson's porch. His wife died last year. He barely ate anymore. Wednesday, mac and cheese for the single mother across the street with 4 kids and 2 jobs. Friday, sweet potato pie for the church bake sale. Pastor Lewis Grant never had to ask. Neighbors called her Miss B. Kids on the block knew, if you're hungry after school, Miss B's door is open. She never asked why. She just handed you a plate and said, "Sit down, baby." She never posted about it, never told anyone. Feeding people was how Beatrice loved. When she couldn't fix the roof or pay the bill or bring Terrence back, she could still make a pot of greens that tasted like home. And that was enough. Almost. Then there was Zoe, 16 years old, sharp, quiet, mature beyond her years, Terrence's daughter. After Terrence died in a car accident at 32, Beatrice fought for custody. Zoe's mother had struggles of her own and eventually agreed. Zoe worked part-time at the gas station after school, $9.50 an hour, Half of every paycheck went into an envelope in the kitchen drawer, labeled in careful handwriting, House Fund. She never mentioned it. Beatrice never touched it. Zoe carried a sketchbook everywhere. Portraits, faces from school, church, the gas station. Her art teacher once said she should apply to art school. Zoe smiled and changed the subject. She knew there was no money. Every Sunday morning, Beatrice made a full breakfast. Scrambled eggs, biscuits and gravy, turkey bacon, grits. They ate together at the kitchen table under the photo wall. Earl and Beatrice on their wedding day, the children on the porch, Terrence in his graduation cap. One frame on that wall was empty. Beatrice pointed to it sometimes. "That one's waiting for your graduation photo, baby, Lord willing." Zoe always smiled, but lately the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. At night, after Zoe went to sleep, Beatrice sat alone at the kitchen table, calculator in one hand, bills in the other. Her hands shook, not from age, but from the weight of it all. She wasn't afraid of being poor. She was afraid of failing Zoe, of the house giving out before Zoe had somewhere safe to land. But every morning she got up, tied on her apron, opened the recipe book, and started cooking. Because that's who she was. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that everything she had been giving away her whole life was about to come back. All of it. And then some. Now, Beatrice had seen plenty of storms in her 74 years. She'd lived in Tennessee her whole life. Thunder, rain, ice, none of it was new. But what was coming that Thursday evening was different. And what it was about to drag to her front door was something she never could have predicted. Thursday afternoon, late October. The sky had been gray all day, the kind of heavy, low gray that presses down on a town like a lid. Beatrice was in the kitchen. She had a big pot of beef stew on the camp stove and a skillet of brown sugar cornbread cooling on the counter. Both were for tomorrow's church potluck. Pastor Grant was counting on her. He always counted on her. Zoe sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out, pencil in one hand, sketchbook open underneath the textbook. Always sneaking in drawings when she thought Beatrice wasn't looking. Beatrice was always looking. The radio on the counter crackled. The forecast had changed. What they'd called light rain that morning was now an ice storm warning. Freezing rain, sleet. Temperatures dropping from 35 into the low 20s. Wind gusts up to 40 miles an hour. Roads glazing over fast. "Gonna be a bad one," Beatrice said, more to herself than to Zoe. Within an hour, the world outside the window turned mean. Freezing rain came sideways. It didn't fall. It attacked. Every branch, every wire, every surface coated in a thin, clear shell of ice. The road out front went from wet to slick to deadly in minutes. The power went out at 6:14. Beatrice knew the exact time because the kitchen clock stopped and she looked at it and said, "Well, there you go." She moved without panic. She'd done this before. Candles from the drawer beside the stove. She kept 6, always. Earl's old camp stove from the garage, still half full of propane. A flashlight for Zoe. Quilts from the hall closet piled onto the couch. Zoe wrapped herself in a blanket, phone dead, nothing to do but watch the candles flicker against the frost forming on the inside of the windows. The house creaked. The wind pushed against it like a bully testing a smaller kid. The furnace had already been struggling. Now it was silent. The only warmth came from the camp stove and the two of them breathing in the same small kitchen. Then, the sound. It came from far away at first, a low rumble underneath the wind. Not thunder, something mechanical, something alive, growing louder. Zoe sat up. "You hear that, Grandma?" Beatrice tilted her head. She did hear it. Engines. Not car engines. Deeper, rougher. The kind of sound that vibrates in your chest before it reaches your ears. Motorcycle engines. A lot of them. The rumble grew until it shook the windows. Then, one by one, the engines cut off. The silence that followed was almost worse. Zoe ran to the window and pressed her face against the cold glass. "Grandma!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "There's bikers in the yard." Beatrice walked to the window. Through the ice-blurred glass, she could see shapes. 15 motorcycles, parked at jagged angles in her gravel driveway and across the front yard. And standing under the carport, 15 men. Big men. Soaked. Frost on their beards, ice on their leather. Some hunched over, arms crossed tight against their bodies. Some stomping their boots, trying to feel their feet. At the front, the biggest of them all. Silver beard. A neck tattoo she couldn't make out in the dark. A leather vest covered in patches. He stood with his shoulders squared, but even from here she could see his hands shaking. Behind him, 2 riders were holding up a third. A young one, early 20s. His head was hanging. His body swayed like he might go down any second. Beatrice stared. 15 Hells Angels, on her lawn, in the middle of an ice storm. Zoe grabbed her arm, tight. "Grandma, no! Don't open that door!" Beatrice looked at her granddaughter. She looked back at the men. She looked at the young one being held up by the others, lips blue, body shaking, barely conscious. And she saw Terrence. Not literally, but the way old women see their lost children in every young person who's hurting. The way a mother's eyes never stop searching for the face that isn't there anymore. She unlatched the screen door and pushed it open. Cold air hit her like a wall. The big one at the front, Colt Jennings, though she didn't know his name yet, looked up. He hadn't expected the door to open. Nobody ever opened the door. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough from the cold. "We don't want any trouble. Our bikes can't handle the ice. We just need—" "I've got stew on the stove," Beatrice said, "and I've got blankets. Now get that boy inside before he falls over." Colt stared at her. This tiny woman in a housecoat, holding a screen door open for 15 men the rest of the world crossed the street to avoid. He looked back at his men. Then he looked at Beatrice again. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. They filed in. Every single one. And Beatrice Sullivan held that door open until the last man was through. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that one of those men was about to see everything. The leaking roof, the empty pantry, the cracked windows, the envelopes in the drawer, all of it. And he wasn't going to forget. What happened inside that house over the next 3 hours is something those 15 men would talk about for the rest of their lives. But one of them, the big one with the silver beard, he wasn't just going to talk about it. He was going to do something about it. 15 bikers filled Beatrice Sullivan's living room and kitchen. 15, in a house built for a family of 5. The contrast would have been funny if it wasn't so human. A man with "Death Before Dishonor" tattooed across his forearm sat in a floral armchair, knees up to his chest. Another ducked under a hanging plant. Hank Dawson, 6'3", former military, vice president of the chapter, stood in the hallway with his head tilted sideways because the ceiling was that low. Leather and lace doilies, skull patches and porcelain angels. 15 of the hardest men in Tennessee crammed into a 74-year-old woman's living room, dripping ice water onto her carpet. And Beatrice moved through them like they were Sunday guests. She didn't hesitate, not for 1 second. She lit the camp stove, set the pot of beef stew over the flame, and the first curl of steam rose into the cold air like a signal. The smell hit the room, rich, smoky, deep, and every man went still. She warmed the cornbread in the cast-iron skillet. She pulled out every bowl she owned, mismatched, chipped, some plastic, some ceramic, and lined them up on the counter. She boiled water for coffee using a second pot. The young rider, Sketch they called him, was in the worst shape. Beatrice sat him in Earl's old recliner, the one she hadn't let anyone sit in since he passed. She wrapped him in the quilt from her own bed. She pressed a warm, damp towel against the back of his neck. "I raised 3 babies," she told him. "I know it's cold when I see it." Sketch looked up at her with glassy eyes. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. Zoe watched from the hallway, arms crossed, still wary. But when Beatrice called her name, just once, soft, the way she always did, Zoe came. She started pulling bowls from the cabinet, pouring coffee into mugs, handing out spoons. She was still scared, but she was her grandmother's girl, and in this house, you fed people. Beatrice served every man, one by one. She ladled stew into bowls, sliced cornbread with a bread knife that had seen better decades, and handed each plate with both hands and a nod. No rush, no fuss. She didn't ask their names. She didn't ask about the patches. In her house, they were guests. That was enough. Colt took his first bite. He stopped chewing. He closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Beatrice across the small kitchen. "Ma'am," he said, "this is the best meal I've had in years." Beatrice waved a hand. "It's just stew, honey. Nothing special." But it was special. Every man in that room knew it. The room went quiet. Just the sound of spoons against bowls and ice tapping the windows. 15 hard men, softened by a warm bowl and a woman who didn't flinch. And while they ate, Hank Dawson did what Hank Dawson always did. He watched. He saw the buckets under the ceiling drips, 3 of them, placed with the precision of someone who'd been doing this for years. He saw the duct tape over the cracked window behind the couch. He saw the frayed cord on the space heater in the corner, the kind of cord that could start a fire any day now. He looked at the pantry. The door was open, and it was nearly empty. A bag of rice, some canned tomatoes, a few eggs, an onion, half a bag of flour. She'd given them almost everything she had. Hank looked across the room at Colt. Their eyes met. Hank didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Colt looked at the buckets, looked at the pantry, looked at the photo wall in the hallway, the wedding picture, the children, the empty frame. He gave one slow nod. Nobody else saw it, but that nod meant everything. Then the stew ran out. 15 big men eat a lot. The pot was empty. The cornbread was gone. Some of the riders hadn't gotten seconds. Sketch was finally warming up, and now he was hungry. Beatrice went to the kitchen without a word. She opened the fridge, nearly bare. Opened the pantry. Rice, canned tomatoes, eggs, 1 onion, flour, and a little butter. That was it. That was everything left in the house. Zoe appeared beside her. She looked at the empty shelves. She whispered so no one else could hear. "Grandma, that's everything. What are we going to eat tomorrow?" Beatrice patted her hand, gentle, steady. "The Lord provides, baby. He always has." And she started cooking again. She made rice and tomato stew with the onion and spices from her rack. She mixed biscuit dough, flour, butter, buttermilk, and baked them in the cast-iron skillet over the camp stove. She scrambled the last eggs with a pinch of cayenne and garlic powder. She wasn't just feeding people. She was cooking for them. There's a difference. Every plate had thought behind it. Every bowl had care in it. Even now, especially now, with nothing left, she made it taste like something. A rider told a joke. Another asked Zoe about school. Sketch, still wrapped in the quilt, looked at Beatrice and said, "You remind me of my grandma." Beatrice smiled. "Then your grandma raised you right." When the last plate was served, Colt reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out something heavy. Brass, the size of a silver dollar. a challenge coin. One side, the Hells Angels' death head. The other side, 3 words engraved deep into the metal. Debts paid in full. He set it on the kitchen table, right next to her mother's recipe book. He didn't explain it. He just looked at her and said quietly, "A debt, Miss B. We always pay our debts." Beatrice didn't understand. She looked at the coin, then back at him, but he didn't say anything else. The storm raged outside. But inside, the house was full in a way it hadn't been since Earl's funeral. Bikers stretched across the floor, leaned against walls, draped over furniture. Hank laid his jacket across Zoe, who had fallen asleep in a kitchen chair. Beatrice sat in her chair by the window, recipe book in her lap. She looked at Earl's photo on the wall and whispered, so quiet no one heard, "Got a full house tonight, Earl. You'd get a kick out of this." Colt was the last one awake. He stood in the hallway looking at the photo wall. The wedding, the children, Terrence's graduation, the empty frame. He stared at that empty frame for a long time. By morning, the ice had melted just enough for the roads to open. Everyone in that house was getting ready to leave. But something had already been set in motion, something Beatrice couldn't see. The men in her living room had already decided. Dawn came slow, pale light through gray clouds, everything outside dripping and gleaming, branches coated in glass, the road shining like wet metal. The bikers woke stiff and sore. They pulled on damp leather, laced boots that hadn't fully dried, checked phones that had finally found a signal. Beatrice was already up. She'd used the last of her eggs and flour to make a small batch of biscuits. Not enough for 15 men, so she made them small, 1 each. A cup of black coffee from the last of the grounds. Road fuel, she said, handing them out with both hands and a nod. The bikers filed out one by one. Each man stopped at the door. Every single one said thank you. Not the throwaway kind, the real kind. Eye contact, a handshake, a dip of the head. Sketch hugged her, wrapped his arms around this tiny woman, and held on. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "Thank you, Miss B." Beatrice patted his chest. "You stay warm out there, baby." One by one, they walked to their bikes. Engines turned over, coughing in the cold, then catching. Colt was the last to leave. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick fold of hundreds, held them out to Beatrice. For the food, for everything. Beatrice looked at the money. She looked at Colt, this enormous man, skull tattoo, silver beard, eyes that had seen things she'd never want to know about. She shook her head. "I didn't feed you for money, sweetheart. I fed you because you were cold and hungry. That's what you do." Something moved behind Colt's eyes. A crack in concrete nobody was supposed to see. He put the money back, slowly. "What you did last night, the way you opened that door, that means something to me, more than you know." Beatrice patted his arm. "You just ride safe, you hear?" Colt pulled on his helmet, turned toward his bike, then stopped. "You're going to see me again, Miss B." She laughed softly. "Well, I'll have stew ready." He didn't smile. He meant every word. The bikes rumbled away until the street was quiet. Beatrice stood on the porch in her housecoat, one hand raised, watching until the last taillight disappeared. She went inside to clean up, found the brass coin on the kitchen table, heavy in her palm. Death head on one side, debts paid in full on the other. "What is that, Grandma?" Zoe asked. "I don't know, baby. One of them left it, probably by accident." She dropped it in the kitchen drawer next to Zoe's house fund envelope. But as she washed the bowls, she glanced out the window. Colt's bike was stopped at the end of the road. He wasn't riding. He was on his phone, gesturing with one hand, pointing back toward her house. Then he drove away. Beatrice watched him go. Something flickered across her face. Not worry, not hope, just a feeling she couldn't name, like the air right before a storm that hasn't arrived yet. She dried her hands, closed the curtain, and went back to her life. Beatrice Sullivan went back to her life that morning. She swept the floor, washed the dishes, and tried to figure out what to cook for the church potluck with an empty pantry. But 60 miles away, in a room she'd never see, a plan was already taking shape, and it was going to show up at her front door before she was ready. Friday came and went. Beatrice called Pastor Grant to apologize. No dish for the potluck this week. He told her not to worry. She was worried anyway. That was her nature. She went through her routine, checked on Mr. Henderson, watered her herb garden, helped Zoe get ready for her shift at the gas station. Normal things. Quiet things. The kind of day that feels exactly like the one before it. But she kept looking at the coin. She'd put it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, next to a small porcelain angel. The death head stared back at her while she washed dishes. It didn't belong there. Heavy brass beside delicate ceramic. And yet she didn't move it. Debts paid in full. She didn't know what it meant. She told herself she didn't care. But twice that afternoon she picked it up and turned it over in her hands. 60 miles east, a warehouse-style office with concrete floors and fluorescent lights. On the wall, the logo for Jennings and Crace Construction. Photos of completed projects, commercial buildings, restaurant renovations, housing developments, awards, permits. Blueprints spread across a steel desk. Colt Jennings sat behind that desk. Flannel shirt, reading glasses, no leather, no patches. A different man in a different world. He was on the phone with Hank. I want the chapter there, full show, Saturday morning, every bike we've got. Hank's voice, steady and low. That's 100 riders, Colt. In a neighborhood like that, people are going to lose their minds. Good. I want them to see it. I want her to see it. He hung up, opened a laptop, pulled up a satellite image of Beatrice's house, zoomed in on the roof, the porch, the driveway, started making notes. Back in Ridgemont, Donna Whitfield, the woman who owned the only diner in town and knew everyone's business, leaned across the counter and told Pastor Grant she'd seen something strange. A black truck, heavy duty, driving slow through Beatrice's neighborhood. 2 men inside, taking photos of houses. Pastor Grant called Beatrice that evening. "B, have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Beatrice, drying a plate with a dish towel. "Louis, the strangest thing that could happen to me already happened. I fed 15 bikers in my living room Thursday night." She laughed. He didn't. On the windowsill, the challenge coin caught the last light of the day. The death head glinted. Debts paid in full. It was Saturday morning, 2 days after the storm. Beatrice was in her garden, checking on her collards, when she heard something that made her stand straight and go still. A sound she'd heard once before, but multiplied by 10. A low, deep, rolling thunder from the end of the street, growing louder every second. Zoe ran out the back door. "Grandma, come out front, right now." Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron and walked around the house. What she saw stopped her dead in the yard. 100 motorcycles. They turned onto her street in a formation 2 blocks long. Harleys, chrome catching the morning sun, riders in full Hells Angels colors. The noise shook every window on the block. The neighborhood came out. Mr. Henderson dropped his newspaper on the porch. Kids froze on their bikes. Donna Whitfield pulled over so hard she hit the curb, grabbed her phone, and called Pastor Grant. "Louis, get to B Street, right now. 100 bikers. I think I'm about to pass out." The formation stopped in front of Beatrice's house. Engines cut off one by one until the silence was louder than the noise had been. 100 riders, all facing one small house. Colt Jennings swung off the lead bike, pulled off his helmet, walked up the gravel driveway with the same heavy boots that had stood on this porch 2 nights ago. Beatrice was holding a garden trowel, mouth open. Zoe had a death grip on her arm. Colt stopped in front of her. Silver beard, skull tattoo. But this morning, he was smiling. "Morning, Miss B. Told you you'd see me again." Beatrice tried to speak. Nothing came out. Colt turned and whistled, one sharp note. Behind the formation, 4 pickups and 2 flatbeds had pulled up unnoticed. Now the riders swarmed them. Tailgates dropped, tarps came off, lumber, bundles of shingles, boxes of nails and screws, rolls of insulation, double-pane windows still in factory packaging, paint, primer, sealant, bags of concrete, electrical wire, copper pipe. And on the last flatbed, strapped down and gleaming, a brand new furnace. Beatrice's knees buckled. Zoe caught her. "What is all this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Colt reached into his back pocket and pulled out a business card. Colt Jennings, owner and president, Jennings and Crace Construction. "I'm not just a rider, Miss B. I build things. I have for 20 years. What I saw in your house Thursday night, that roof, those steps, that furnace running on faith, I couldn't ride away from that." Hank stepped forward, clipboard in hand, tool belt already on. "Full crew, ma'am. Roofers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. Every man volunteered. Everyone remembers that stew." He turned the clipboard around. A full work order. Roof replacement, porch rebuild, furnace installation, electrical update, window replacement, paint inside and out. Every line item had the same cost. $0. Beatrice stared at the clipboard. Her hands trembled. "I can't pay for this." Colt shook his head. "You already did. Thursday night. A bowl of stew, a warm house, and a door that was open when every other one was closed. We pay our debts, Miss B. That's the code." He reached into his vest and held up a challenge coin. Behind him, every rider did the same. 100 hands raised. 100 brass coins catching the Saturday sun. Debts paid in full. Pastor Grant's car pulled up. He got out in his house slippers and stopped dead in the street. Trucks, materials, 100 bikers, Beatrice shaking in her yard. "Lord have mercy," he said. Beatrice turned to him, tears running down her face. "Louis, these men want to fix my house." The work began within minutes. Ladders went up. Old shingles came off in sheets. A team ripped out the porch steps with crowbars. Another carried the new furnace through the side door. Hammers and drills filled the street like a heartbeat coming back to life. Beatrice tried to go inside to cook. Colt stopped her. "No, ma'am. You fed us once. Today, you sit." But she couldn't sit. She stood on the lawn watching her house come alive. When she finally spoke, it was to Zoe. "Your granddaddy Earl always said, 'You plant good seeds, B. You don't know when they'll grow, but they'll grow.'" Zoe was crying. She held the challenge coin from the windowsill, squeezing it until the edges pressed white lines into her palm. Neighbors gathered. At first, they kept their distance. 100 Hells Angels will do that. But as they saw what was happening, the building, the fixing, the transformation, fear melted into wonder. Someone brought lemonade. Someone carried out sandwiches. By noon, half the neighborhood was watching, helping, cheering every time old roof came down and new went up. And Beatrice stood in the middle of it all, small, still trembling, watching 100 strangers rebuild the house that love built 60 years ago. But fixing the house? That was just the beginning. What Colt said to Beatrice that afternoon, sitting on her brand new porch steps, made her grab the railing so hard her knuckles went white. By late afternoon, the transformation was staggering. New roof, architectural shingles, dark gray, 30-year warranty. Not a single leak, not one. The buckets Beatrice had placed for years were stacked in the garage, empty and useless. the most beautiful, useless things she'd ever seen. New porch, reinforced steps, a solid railing, fresh-stained wood that smelled like cedar. The second step didn't crack anymore. There was no second step to skip. New furnace. Installed, tested, humming quietly in the basement like it had always been there. Warm air pushed through vents that hadn't worked properly in years. New windows, double pane, sealed tight. No more duct tape. No more frost on the inside in January. Electrical brought up to code. The frayed cord on the space heater didn't matter anymore, because she didn't need the space heater anymore. Fresh paint inside and out. Warm white walls. The front door a deep blue that Zoe picked. New countertops in the kitchen, donated by a Jennings and Crace supplier. Same house, same bones, same soul, but solid now. Safe. Warm. Colt sat down beside Beatrice on the new porch steps. Zoe sat on the other side. Hank stood nearby, arms crossed. Pastor Grant leaned against the railing, still in his house slippers. Colt rested his elbows on his knees and looked straight ahead for a moment. Then he turned to Beatrice. "Miss B, the house is done, but I'm not." Beatrice looked at him. "Honey, you've done more than—" "I've got 2 more things," he said. Not sharp, just clear. The voice of a man who had made up his mind and wasn't asking permission. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, plain white. He handed it to Beatrice. She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, a check, made out to the Ridgemont Community Food Fund. $25,000. Beatrice read the number, read it again. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, Colt explained. The fund would provide weekly groceries for 15 families in the neighborhood. Managed by Pastor Grant's church. Restocked monthly. Fully funded for the first 2 years, with a plan to make it self-sustaining after that, through the annual charity ride. "You've been feeding this neighborhood on your own dime for years, Miss B. Chicken and dumplings from Mr. Henderson, mac and cheese for the woman across the street, pies for the church, all of it out of that kitchen, out of that pantry, out of your pocket. That stops today. From now on, the food is covered." Beatrice pressed the check against her chest. She couldn't look at anyone. Her shoulders shook. Pastor Grant put his hand on her back. He didn't speak. He didn't trust his own voice. Then Colt turned to Zoe. "Your grandmother showed me something Thursday night. That wall in the hallway. The pictures, the frames. She told my boy Sketch about one frame she's been saving, an empty one, for your graduation photo." Zoe went still. Colt reached into his jacket again, a second envelope. He held it out to her. "I made some calls. I've got a friend on the board of the Tennessee Arts Academy in Nashville. I told him about a girl in Ridgemont who draws portraits in a sketchbook and has never had a single art lesson. He asked to see her work. I sent him photos." Zoe's hands were trembling. She took the envelope, opened it. A letter. On official letterhead, 3 paragraphs. She read the first line and stopped breathing. "Full scholarship. Tennessee Arts Academy. Tuition, housing, materials, and mentorship with a professional portrait artist. Starting next fall." Zoe read it twice. 3 times. The words blurred because she was crying too hard to see. She looked at Beatrice. "Grandma." Beatrice pulled her in, held her tight on that brand new porch in front of 100 bikers, and neither one of them could say a word. They just held on. Pastor Grant turned away. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Hank looked down at his boots. When Beatrice finally let go, she looked at Colt. Her voice was raw, broken, barely there. "Why? Why all this? It was just stew." Colt leaned forward, His voice dropped, not for effect, but because what he was about to say was real, and it cost him something to say it. 18 years ago, I was 40 years old, dead broke, sleeping in a garage. I'd just come out of a bad stretch, the kind you don't talk about. I had nothing, no one. And a woman I'd never met, an old black woman in Memphis, let me sleep on her couch for 3 weeks, fed me every night, never asked a single question. When I left, I told her I'd pay her back. She grabbed my hand and said, "Don't pay me back. Pay it forward." He paused. I've been paying it forward ever since, building things, fixing things, helping people who remind me of her. And Thursday night, sitting in your kitchen, eating that stew, looking at those pictures on your wall, I was back in that woman's house in Memphis. And I knew exactly what I had to do. Silence on the porch. The kind that fills a space instead of emptying it. Beatrice reached out and took Colt's hand, this enormous, tattooed hand in both of hers. She held it the way she held everything, gently, with both hands. "Then she raised you right too," Beatrice said. Colt looked at her. And for the first time in as long as anyone could remember, the president of the Hells Angels Ridgemont County chapter had to look away because he couldn't hold it together. What happened in Ridgemont over the next 14 months didn't just change Beatrice Sullivan's life. It changed the zip code. Start with the house. Beatrice slept through a rainstorm for the first time in 6 years. She woke up at 3 a.m. out of habit, swung her legs off the bed, and reached for the bucket that wasn't there. She sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark, listening to rain hit a roof that didn't leak, and cried so quietly she didn't wake Zoe. The furnace ran all winter without a single dying cat sound. Warm air came through every vent. The windows stayed clear. No frost on the inside. No duct tape. No plastic sheeting. She stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning. New countertops, same cast iron skillets, same recipe book open on the counter, and said to Earl's photo, "House is warm, baby. Finally warm." Then the Food Fund. The Ridgemont Community Food Fund launched within a month. Pastor Grant managed it through the church. 15 families received weekly groceries, delivered every Thursday by volunteers. Fresh produce, meat, dairy, pantry staples. No applications, no paperwork. Just a knock on the door and a box of food. Beatrice still cooked. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, same schedule, same plates left on porches. But now her pantry was full. She didn't have to choose between feeding Mr. Henderson and feeding herself. For the first time in years, she opened her fridge and didn't do math. She started something new, a Saturday cooking class at the church, free, open to anyone. She taught young mothers how to stretch a grocery budget, how to make soup from scraps, biscuits from almost nothing, stew that tasted like someone loved you. 8 women signed up the first month. By the 3rd month, she had 20. The farmer's market invited her to open a booth. She set up a folding table under a pop-up tent and sold beef stew, cornbread, and sweet potato pie in takeaway containers. She called it Miss B's Kitchen, hand-lettered sign, nothing fancy. It sold out every Saturday by 11. The county fair gave her a permanent vendor slot. A local newspaper ran a small feature with a photo of Beatrice behind her table, apron on, ladle in hand, smiling the way she smiled when she didn't know anyone was watching. She opened a savings account for the first time in 5 years. She bought a winter coat, her first new one in 8 years. She put money in an envelope in the kitchen drawer, right next to Zoe's house fund, and labeled it Rainy Day. She laughed when she wrote it. Rain didn't scare her anymore. Then there was Zoe. Zoe started at the Tennessee Arts Academy in Nashville that fall, first in her family to attend any kind of post-secondary program. She called Beatrice every night, sometimes excited, sometimes overwhelmed, always homesick for the first month. She struggled early. She'd never been in a room full of formally trained artists, kids who'd had private lessons since they were 10, kids who knew terminology she'd never heard. She felt behind. She felt small. But her raw talent, those portraits from the sketchbook, faces drawn at gas stations and church pews, caught her mentors off guard. Her line work was instinctive. Her eye for emotion was years beyond her training. Second semester, she created a series of charcoal portraits called Ridgemont Faces. Her grandmother's hands kneading dough, Mr. Henderson on his porch, Colt's face by candlelight, sketch wrapped in a quilt. The series won the Student Showcase Award. A Nashville gallery included one piece in a group exhibition. The portrait of Beatrice's hands, wrinkled, strong, holding a ladle over a pot. Title, Full House. Beatrice drove 3 hours to see it, stood in front of it for 10 minutes, didn't say a word. Then, baby, your granddaddy would have loved this. And the ripple kept spreading. A regional nonprofit partnered with Jennings and Crace to expand the home repair program. 6 more houses on Beatrice's street were repaired within the year: roofs, plumbing, electrical. Colt's chapter established an annual charity ride, the Miss B Ride. First year, $120,000 raised, riders from 4 states. Donna Whitfield started a Pay It Forward board at her diner. Customers could buy a meal for someone who couldn't afford one. The board was never empty. The news clip of the rebuild went viral. 2.3 million views. Comments from 12 countries. The hashtag Miss B the Stew Queen trended for 3 days. A morning show invited Beatrice to appear. She declined. I don't need to be on TV. I need to be in my kitchen. But the story doesn't end with a fixed house and a scholarship. Because Beatrice Sullivan made a quiet promise, one she never said out loud, and she's been keeping it every single day since. Every Thursday night, the church hall opens. Same time, same table setup, same menu. Beef stew, brown sugar cornbread, collard greens, sweet potato pie if the mood strikes her. Beatrice cooks it all herself. Same apron, same cast iron skillets, same recipe book propped open on the counter even though she hasn't needed it in 40 years. Anyone is welcome. No reservations, no questions. Locals, truckers passing through, families from 2 counties over who heard about Miss B and drove an hour just to taste the stew. Nobody pays, nobody is turned away. Once a month, the bikers come too. A group from Colt's chapter rides to Ridgemont for Thursday dinner. They park their Harleys in the church lot, chrome and leather next to minivans and beat-up sedans. They sit at folding tables, skull patches beside Sunday dresses, tattoos beside overalls. They bow their heads when Pastor Grant says grace. They eat seconds, sometimes thirds. It's the strangest, most beautiful thing in Tennessee. One Thursday, late fall, a storm rolled in. Freezing rain, just like that night. The kind that turns roads to glass and makes the sky feel like it's pressing down on you. Most people stayed home. The church hall was half empty. Beatrice was in the kitchen anyway, stirring the pot, because that's what she does, storm or no storm. Then, a knock at the church door. A young woman, early 20s, soaked through, shivering, holding a baby against her chest, wrapped in a jacket 2 sizes too big. Her car broke down on the highway. She'd walked a mile in the rain. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know anyone. Beatrice didn't ask a single question. She took the baby, held him against her chest, one hand on his head, the way she'd held her own babies, the way she'd held Zoe. She wrapped the woman in a blanket, sat her at the table closest to the heater. She ladled a bowl of stew, cut a thick slice of cornbread, set it down in front of the woman with both hands. You're safe now, sweetheart. Eat. The young woman looked at the food, looked at Beatrice. Her lip trembled. I don't have any money. Beatrice shook her head, smiled, patted her hand. You don't need any. She walked back to the kitchen. On the wall behind the stove, framed and mounted, the brass challenge coin. Debts paid in full. Beside it, Zoe's graduation photo. Cap and gown, huge smile, diploma in hand. The empty frame wasn't empty anymore. And on the windowsill by the sink, right where it had always been, next to the porcelain angel, a candle burned low and steady. The same kind of candle Beatrice lit the night she opened her door to 15 strangers. She kept one burning every Thursday, just in case someone needed the light. If this story hit you the way it hit me, drop a like. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever helped a stranger without knowing who they were? Or has a stranger ever changed your life when you least expected it? I want to hear your story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who's tired. Someone who's giving everything and wondering if it matters. Tell them about Miss B. Tell them it matters. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, turn on notifications. Because stories like this one...
Miss B had $38, an empty pantry, and she still fed 15 strangers everything she had. She didn't ask who they were. She just saw people who were cold and hungry. And you know what stayed with me? When Cold tried to hand her money, she pushed it away. She said, "I didn't feed you for money. I fed you because you were hungry. That's it. No big speech, no expectations. Just women who believe that feeding people is how you love them." And here's the beautiful part. Cole understood. Because 18 years ago, when he had nothing, a black woman in Memphis took him in, fed him, never asked for anything. She just said, "Pay it forward." Miss B didn't know she was continuing a chain of kindness that started long before her. She was just being who she always been, a woman who opens her door when the world says, "Lock it." And that makes me think about it. How many times have you helped someone and thought, does it even matter? Maybe you fed someone who couldn't pay you back. Tell me in the comments, what's an act of kindness you gave that nobody ever saw? If this moved you, hit the like and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe if you are new. And remember, kindness doesn't disappear.